Hey everyone. So today I wanted to answer a question that many Muslims might have of someone like me. That if I've left Islam, if I've gone through my own journey, then why am I bothering to really challenge and present so much critics and just really expose Islam? Really, why am I doing all of this? It's because it's not as simple, right? If everybody was simply a cherry picking Muslim, most of you guys, where they pick the good parts, they had the rosy Islam, living in the West, they live with safety rules and the systems that we have here. And then religion is a very personal matter. It would be a very different dynamic. That's how most Muslims here live. It's a very personal matter. Everything is a personal choice. You can cherry pick essentially what parts you like of Islam and which parts you're like, no, I don't really resonate with that. But for a lot of people, when they are going full force into Islam, that's not their world. They don't really get to cherry pick. They're waterboarded with a lot of ideologies. And once you start examining a lot of the inside deep ideologies, you'll begin to realize that it's not as simple. Maybe some of you have even begin to forget, or a lot of you have that dirty secret. You're like, we know these ugly parts, but we also know that we don't simply follow them, like our parents, our families. We kind of distance ourselves from that. But that's not the case with everyone. And why do ideologies matter? Why does this matter, right? Let's take a deeper look. Ideologies matter because they function not simply as answering questions, why am I here? Who is God? What's happening? Just like a background fairy tale, a bedtime story. No, they're much more sinister. They are much more deeper. They have much more weight in an average person or an average Muslim's life. They are meaning-making systems in our life. So for a lot of people, they have even stopped noticing how much influence it has. But it's kind of easy to spot once you point them out. For a lot of Muslims, it doesn't just simply end at your janamaz or your prayer rug. Islam and the whole ideology behind it is much more deep-rooted. It's a more unity and an identity and a very collective sense that we are going through this worldly test and we are all under this siege of infidels, and we have to really make a united ummah and bring the truth. That's how the ideology sees it. So regardless of where or what stage they are in, if they're just new immigrants to a country, they need to assimilate, they need to gain their footing in this new world. But that doesn't really stop them. You're not going to see them coming here face first as terrorists. But as time grows and as they grow in power, their mission, their prime goal is to really bring the Muslim Ummah, right? The Muslim Ummah is the ultimate goal here, regardless of where they are, whether they're in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, in Bangladesh, or in some other Arab country, Egypt, Mauritania, anywhere. Their ultimate goal is that the Muslim and the true Islam takes precedence. So that's the deeper ingrained ideology that a lot of you might not be seeing, right up front, beyond the hijab, beyond the beard. Islam, in the whole sense, isn't a simple ideology that answers basic questions. It goes deeper into reconditioning your nervous system to how you see a lot of the events that are happening around the world, right? A lot of the events, why are some of them so triggering for Muslims? It's because it's a lot of it based on their ideology that they have a sense of standing up and going and furthering Islam and standing up against the kuffar or the bad others, Christians or Jews. In the current times, it's the Jews who are really hurting Islam. So when it's turned for the Christians to hurt Islam, they're going to be standing against that too. And that's kind of what they're trying to do in the West. Once you start to see that Islam is beyond just the identity of the external, it's more of it anchors you into an identity that now you have to see the world from that point of view. So even if you saw the world in a different way before, if you're one of those few people who actually had a different point of view of Islam, and then now you have to build a new, very constricted identity of how you see the world through Islam. It's essentially seeing the world and a lot of the issues through that lens. And that's one of the reasons why challenging Islam or anything about it is very triggering for Muslims, because they not only see it as an investigation on a doctrine, like any other doctrine, it's an investigation on their whole truth, their identity, the scaffolding that they cling to. Ideologies build worlds inside of people. That's why when you question it, it feels like an attack on their families. It's an emotional trigger. It's attack on their sacred, unquestionable history. And that's why they all converge to defend it. And this is how I see it. The ideology or the real formula of Islam always has the same result, right? Regardless of where you find it in its full ideological form, practice in any underdeveloped world or any other Muslim world, where they're free, the laws are exactly to their liking, it will always produce the same type of result, the same type of people, the same type of mentality. And that's the kind of mentality that you are slowly seeing and being infiltrated everywhere in the Western world. This rosy Islam that you're seeing practiced in the West, the RIS version, the rosy glass version, the new updated version, which has put a lot of the other ideologies in the shadows. They haven't outright said it's wrong. They just put it in the shadows and they've spotlight a few things that to their liking in essentially cherry picking, which is a great thing that they're doing really. But now when you see it practiced in its full form, it always produces the same results. Across geographies, across countries, across different languages, they all, once you install that type of ideology, that kind of program starts running, and all of them are now fed with this, it always ends up with the same result. So you might be wondering how today's Muslims are basically trained to rebuttal or basically numb themselves against these hard questions. The first thing is that a lot of the Muslims today that have grown up in Islam have had a lot of, they know the issues, right? And they always have the same pre-installed answer that you go to every school, they have the same answer. The West is out to get you. And here are the rebuttals that we all have the same rebuttals. We all heard it. We all grew up with the same sheikhs and imams telling us the same things. But they never really want you to think for yourself. They're not actually asking you to come up with a good rebuttal. They're like, here's a script and this is a rebuttal. So that when facts clash with beliefs or the ideology, creating a lot of cognitive dissonance, they have all these pre-written out justifications, never really addressing or actually coming to the point of the challenge of whatever the question is. All they have is the same rebuttals. What also sneaky thing they do is they reframe your questioning or anyone's questioning doubts as a moral failure. They reframe doubt as tests. So even the fact that you are questioning, which is a normal human process, normal human curiosity, it is now painted as a moral failing on your part rather than a normal human curiosity or just logical questions. Another thing that when I was growing up, I heard a lot was the Muslim scholars at the time were really afraid and they kept throwing around the word bid'ah. Bid'ah is basically any reformation or change to the Quran, right? So God forbid you actually come up with a realization that this is a pretty bad act. We are not making sense with this. A lot of ugly things in Islam. And instead of calling them out, saying they're wrong, you would just have the bid'ah firewall. So those changes are not to be discussed by you or to be made. So in other words, for you to try to improve the 7th century culture or customs is considered heretical. For a lot of Muslims, they think they have the free choice, that they came to it freely, that they're actually so lucky because they have all the answers, even the ones who are born into it, right? They already have the pre-installed justifications. So they never really have to bother. But when you actually start questioning and examining, is like, so if you're saying that if you found something, if you, with your intellect and your good heart, you were actually to find that it doesn't make sense or it is not aligned with humanitarian values, are you actually willing to leave it? And a lot of them in their minds are thinking, yeah, I would, but actually they won't. So they have this idea of, they never were encouraged to evaluate a lot of this claims or ideologies outside of clerical or like the sheikh or imam's gatekeeping. You are never really truly allowed to examine yourself or reach any conclusions on your end. So if you were to say today, young Muslims, if you were to say, hey, maybe we should rethink slavery, that's a pretty heinous act. I don't think any Muslim today could ever stand for it. In fact, nobody in the West I know as a Muslim would ever support such a horrible idea. You can say, I think it's time to put a definitive haram on it, right? We can just outright call it haram. But notice how you will never ever hear Muslim scholars or even Muslims among themselves who think in their heart it's wrong, they can never outright say that it is haram because they are not allowed to make any changes. Same thing with polygamy. A lot of it is heavy defense and, oh, it was a time, it was a culture, I think, and a lot of other people had it. But the biggest rebuttal is a lot of cultures now, religions don't have it. They've put a haram label on it. Why is Islam so lagging back? Why are they so reluctant? Because again of this firewall of bid'ah, that they can't make any changes. We can't improve. We can't do anything and say anything that was wrong is wrong. And the biggest and the other rebuttal was the customs and cultures. So it was back then, but how does that help you? So if the circumstances in today's world were to change and this were again happening, so that's okay. That's divine law. Think Yazidi women in Iraq. Think the Afghanistan situation. Think Mauritania. Slavery wasn't banned for much longer. And the most sad thing that Saudi actually banned very late as a constitutional law slavery. So you see, ideologies do make a difference. They do have an impact. What I find extremely disturbing is that instead of patching up and revisiting and improving the laws of Islam, what they end up telling you is that you are the bug, essentially, because you have the questions and you want to fix things, but that Islam is final and intact and we are just not going to change it. So that's the ideological programming. And their perfect solution for it is to download Islam, the Islam files, the Quran files, Quran.exe on loop and keep playing it until you stop noticing the problems, until you stop noticing the heinous acts, the cringe verdicts, the cringe materials. What I see is that today's Islam is terrified of today's Muslims or Muslims getting admin privileges, all right? You are here just as an observer, spectator, to follow blindly, to not cherry pick, to not question, because that's a moral failure. So you have to follow it blindly in order to go to your final destination, Jannah. Islam is terrified of people having admin privileges, being in a position to critique, to challenge, to question, to think. You are only allowed to come in guest mode, basically, with everything pre-installed, predetermined, exactly how it is, and not to ever come and try to change anything here. What I found the most bizarre is how everything, when even the Muslims who are deeply rooted in Islam, when they come and they have something, they're wrestling with an issue, several issues in Islam, when they're wrestling with an issue particularly, how they're faced with the idea of you need to come with an open heart and open mind. And they do that. They're like, I'm going to really try. I'm going to pray. I'm going to download the Quran, play on repeat, listen to different imams. But there's still questioning, wrestling. And then they're like, I'm still not really understanding it. I really can't figure out. You need to really open your heart, come with an open mind. And you're like, I'm trying here. I really am. And then in the end, they'll just simply tell you, you need to leave your mind. You do not need to bring logic to this. Leave it to the scholar. The sheikhs have already figured it out. You don't need to be wasting your brain cells. So that, you see how that's playing out? You're like, you give this idea that maybe you actually have the choice to think and it's going to be a rational choice or something that you truly align with your values. But no, that's not how it is. So when someone comes in like me and challenges Islam, shows the questions, the critiques, someone like who walks into a forum and says, hey, you know that this app drains your battery, shuts off your mind, throws a virus in your whole system. You're really full of this ideological beliefs, essentially, and crashes your life, right? You know that. And of course, there's a whole loyal fan base that comes rushing and says, no, you don't really understand what it is. It's perfect. You just don't understand the context, the patch notes. We all get it, right? It's so obvious. And it only takes enough triggers before people are they really literally have to shut their mind down before they can't bear any more questions. And something like that happened to me much later in my life. I had grown up in Saudi Arabia. I have seen the traditional Islam. I went to an Arabic school. I studied Quran. I had the best upbringing in a Saudi context. And later, I also had the privilege of living and growing up in Canada, in Mississauga. So I saw the multiculturalism there. I had a background in psychology, world religions. These were my favorite subjects at university. I truly understand the multiculturalism and that whole young mind exploring and really learning more about different Muslims, different cultures, different sects, different backgrounds. Getting exposed to a lot of ideas. And going to RIS, the ISNA conferences, being part of that community, the MSAs. So yes, I was a big part of it. I saw the cultural Muslims, the Pakistani student associations, the Indian student associations, all the Arabs because I spoke Arabic. So I had a very interesting exposure, mix of friends and groups. To the fact that I also have a background in pharmacy, so I understand the rigor thinking, the actual professionalism that needed in the West here to what you basically need to show up as a critical thinker and applying that in my life, right? Having that development in my life and the tools. So if that's something that you are going through, someone that you can relate to, someone like my story, I highly recommend you take the program that I put together. It's all recorded videos. I go into detail about how I grew up, what were the challenges, what were the ideas, and how I overcame a lot of the ingrained beliefs. Because once you find contradictions or you see what it is, you can't really unsee them. And now, what are the next steps? I'll leave the link below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.